You are listening to the Barely Audible podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Barely Audible podcast. My name is Justin Romine, joined with my host, Bear. Also joining us today is Bill Oberst Jr., one of my all-time favorite actors and all-time favorite people. We've been friends for probably 15 or more years. It's nice to have you on, Bill.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Thank you, Bears. Appreciate you guys having me.
Pleasure. Pleasure's all ours.
So just a little introduction. Bill has been working in film for quite a long time. He also does stage stuff. And a couple years ago, you were doing, was it the Ray Bradbury thing?
Yeah, I played Ray on stage for his family, toured it, did it off Broadway. And then I did, before that, a piece Ray wrote early in his career called Pillar of Fire about, it was really the first zombie story, a dead guy who's the last dead man, the last corpse in the world, and he wakes up. And he's on the run because they want to burn the last corpse. And so I also toured Pillar of Fire, did it off Broadway. And so the Ray Bradbury folks have been nice to me.
I love Ray Bradbury. I grew up reading his stuff. My favorite book of his is The Illustrated Man. And
yeah.
I've been trying to make that into a serial, like TV show for years.
Yeah.
I even went to San Diego Comic-Con probably about 15 or so years ago with a friend of mine, mainly because he was speaking at an event there. It ended up selling out, so I never even got in the room with him, but I was going to pitch it to him if I could shake his hand and say hello. The Illustrated Man would have made great TV just because of all the stories that are on his tattoos.
I've heard that Ray was notorious for giving licenses that his literary agent didn't want him to give. Since he had passed, when I did mine, I got my licenses from the estate. But I know a lady who has a license to perform one of his stories because she just wrote to Ray and he answered all of his mail. And he wrote back and he just put, "Yes, do perform in perpetuity, Ray," with his big explanation points. And she's like, "Hey, he told me I could." And the literary agent's like, Ray. So had you gotten Ray aside, Justin, he might have said yes.
That was the plan. If I'd have known I could have just wrote him, I would have did that instead of traveling from Vegas to San Diego.
He was all
Have you seen the Ray Bradbury Theater
Yes.
when it aired on television?
Yeah. And I don't know if it was through the Ray Bradbury Theater or not, but they had done, I think, a movie or something of The Illustrated Man.
Yeah, there was a movie of Illustrated Man with Rod Serling.
Yeah.
Early on, like back in the 60s. Ray's hard to adapt because he's about metaphor.
Yeah.
And imagery that is in your head. And it's really, really hard to adapt. When I was last up in Indianapolis at Purdue University, they have Ray's, all of his books, all of his effects. He left everything to them. His office is reconstructed, etc. So the director out there, who's a really nice guy, has been good to me, Jason, he said, "I got something you might want to see." He said, we found in going through Ray's archives what we think is the only copy of the original cut of Something Wicked, This Way Comes.
Yeah.
With the original score and the original cut. And Disney didn't like it because it was too dark and they didn't want to do dark stuff at the time. And this is the only copy we think that exists of the original cut. So I watched it and it was great. It was closer. It was a lot closer to the book than what originally came out. But still, it wasn't the book. Ray's tough to adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. Easy to read, though.
I think most people that are easy to read are tough to adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because it's all in your head when you're reading. So my first introduction really was Fahrenheit 451. We read that in school,
Yeah.
and I've seen the movies and stuff that they've made of it, but there's something missing from all of those. So even like the bigger budget one that came out a couple years ago was kind of tough to watch.
You know, he's easier to do on stage because on stage you got the energy of the people there in the room.
Yeah.
And on stage also, you can really concentrate on the words in a way that you don't have to cut, keep cutting back and forth and back and forth. When I did Pillar of Fire, he did this beautiful soliloquy, Justin. It's like, I call it a hymn to Halloween. But the guy, the corpse, who inexplicably woke up, the last dead man on earth, he's about to be burned, and he knows it. And so he goes into this piece in which he says, I am, and then he says all the things that he is, because he's all that remains of Poe and of Lovecraft. I am Halloween. I am a night bat with gray wings. I am all of these things. And he talks about how if you take all of the dark things and the superstition out of the world, you lose a lot. And he knows they're going to burn him, but he's got to say it anyway.
Oh,
And
wow.
people cried at performances of that. I could hardly do it without crying myself, because what he's talking about is the loss of an entire, in his case, he represents a society, but the loss of a life. Any of us at the end of our life could say, I am, and then list all of the things that you are. And suddenly you're no more.
That's true.
So yeah, I think that's one thing that makes Ray hard to adapt. Was he was joyful, but he was also haunted by death.
Hmm.
And that's hard to bring across those things together.
What do you think where his fear of death originated from?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Where do you think his fear of death originated from?
Surely the early deaths of two of his siblings. And he grew up, he was born in 1925, so that was an era where a lot of people died early on. He said, in my generation, if you wanted to visit your family, you went to the cemetery, because so many of them were dead.
Right.
So death, resurrection, what you could do in order to cheat mortality became a huge theme for him. That's why he decided he was going to live forever. He was going to never die, because people were going to remember him. Because his books, he dreamed as a boy selling papers on the streets of Los Angeles. One day, my books will be leaning shoulder to shoulder with Poe and Lovecraft and Hawthorne. And in that way, I'll live forever. And they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yet Ray himself, what remained of him physically, like all of us, is in the cemetery or scattered to the wind. And that's
but
a
that's
crushing thing.
it's not who we really are, is it? I mean, we're no more our cars than we are these, hamburger suits that we haul around and interact in this matrix with. We're the timeless entity that inhabits and animates these earth suits, aren't we?
And that's the question. Are we?
Mhm.
If we are, then there's a lot more hope. But what if we're just our bodies? I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I don't know.
I began meditation at a really early age, at around 13, and I began satsang and just sort of meditated twice a day. And eventually, I had two peak experiences, and the first one was one of the most profound experiences, where you sort of lose your ego and your sense of self and identity, and the universe just sort of streams through past, present, and future, all this information and knowledge, and it seems like it takes forever, but I'm sure it's less than a nanosecond that this experience actually occurred and lasted. And I wasn't doing drugs of any sort, but I had always been called to meditate from a very young age. And since then, I kind of have this cosmic gender awareness of we're not really these bodies. And I do believe that life continues and goes on. For anyone who's had an NDE or a near-death experience also knows this.
I'm interested that you said you felt called to meditate. How did you experience that, the call?
Through dreams, certainly, and past life memories.
How interesting.
I even have pre-birth memories. I remember being given the option of who my birth hosts could be. Long story short, I loved the music of the 60s, the late 60s, and I'm just like, and I had just come from World War II. That was the thing. I was bloody tired. I just wanted to vacation this lifetime. But the universe apparently had other ideas for me. Again, we're given numerous opportunities to choose birth hosts that may help further progress our spiritual learning and lessons, or where we're needed, certainly along their life path, as it were. But again, I was called to the music of the late 60s, and I was sort of hasty. I'm like, I just want to get this over with and get on to the next chapter, whatever it was. And I remember my birth host going, "It's not the most ideal situation for you." And I'm like, "It'll be fine. I just came from World War II." So after that, I felt like, these wonderful teachers like Babaji and Paramahansa Yogananda calling to me. And I've always felt a very deep affinity with these beings. And I've always been called to like Indian music and the stories of like, classic Indian literature of Hanuman and Sita and Ram and so on, which led me on this path of being a spiritual seeker. And the more, you self-analyze and learn about the world, as it were, and your place in it, I think your heart becomes more open and you just see things with a more unified sort of perspective. And I know I went off on a tangent, and I hope that answered your question a little bit.
No. Oh, no, it's fascinating. And the word call, you used it over and over again in that response. And the Latin for vocation, vocare, is call. It literally means vocare, to call. And I've talked to many ministers about this, about vocation, and over again, you hear, I was called, I was called, I was called. It's just, it's a beautiful thing to think that something outside of ourselves could call us. It makes us feel less lonely.
Do you remember, Bill, your first inclination or your first stirrings of wanting to be an actor? I mean, I've had similar passion. I've followed a similar route myself. But
I do.
were you a child at the time?
Yes, very early. And the way that I remember it, which may not be correct, is that I did it as a response of being bullied and picked on, because I was different in every way that you could be different. I was the fat kid, the ugly kid, the smart kid, the sissy kid in a small town in South Carolina. So I didn't fit in any way. And I started entertaining to get people to stop beating the crap out of me, frankly. But it whether that was the motivation, as I remember it or not, I never wanted to do anything else. I felt as if I were born to do it. Not to be famous. You see, that's the thing. Like
Yeah.
my profession, it gets conflated with fame. It has nothing to do with that. So when you say, "Oh, I always felt I wanted to be an actor," "Oh, you always wanted to be famous." No,
No.
it didn't have anything to do with that. I was a kid. I was a little boy. I just knew that I wanted to be in somebody else's skin. Not that I hated my own, but I wanted to perform and be somebody else and make people believe that I was.
And that's interesting because I was also the fat kid. I really wasn't bullied too bad. Name calling a little bit and stuff like that, but I also got into the arts as sort of an escape.
Mm.
And so when I was about 8 or so, I I saw the movie Nightmare on Elm Street, and I've talked about this on previous podcasts. But watching that movie and watching how the actors were crawling on the walls, it made me kind of disappear and wonder how they made that happen. And so the movie magic kind of got, put into me by getting through watching the horror movies, and where I was kind of analyzing them more than I was kind of enjoying them. So even now, I watch movies twice. First time to try and just kind of enjoy it, And the second time I kind of analyze it and look at, motivations for, certain camera angles or cuts or, stuff like that. I've never been much of an actor. I do act, and I've taken many acting classes and stuff, but I feel much more comfortable behind the camera helping those who like to uh, escape into another person. And I like creating this world with actors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. When I was at Allen Ginsberg's farm one summer afternoon for a summer solstice celebration, the great photographer Robert Frank and I had a wonderful discussion, and he's like, you can also write poetry with images, with imagery, and that encounter just changed my whole life.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we think in pictures.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Imagery,
actually, the three of us.
Mhm.
imagery itself can be a poem. Oh my God, that's beautiful.
So whenever I was poet in residence, or whenever I found myself in that position, I always wanted to elevate their experience, the students' experience. I wanted to take those words and see if we could find other ways to express our feelings instead of individual letters or words. So I gave the students about 2 hours to go out into the woods, find objects that were meaningful for them, and come back and write poetry with it. And the most profound experience happened when about 35 people come back in with feathers, broken bottles, hubcaps, bits of license plate, because this was down in rural North Carolina at the time. And they just came back and made these most magnificent creations out of found material that they translated their thoughts and feelings into. And it was like having a whole room of individual Joseph Cornell boxes that were living and breathing, with these random objects.
May I share with you, when you mentioned the woods, you brought to mind a poem that Ray wrote about autumn. It's not really a poem. It's a bit of prose, but it reads as poetry. Do you mind?
Please.
Absolutely.
I,
Be wonderful.
I came to Ray in the woods. I found my first Ray Bradbury book laying out in the woods, walking the woods. I used to love to walk in the woods when I was a kid. I still love the silence and the being among the trees. But Ray wrote this about autumn. Autumn. Autumn was burning the land down into ruins. All across the country, the ruins of summer lay. Vast forest bloomed with flame, tumbled down timber onto empty, unleafed timber. The smoke of the burning was rich, blue, and invisible. And that's one of the first things I read from Ray as a boy in the woods.
Wow.
And I was blown away by how he had taken trees changing color and turned them into that. And it helped me to fall in love with words.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
I first kind of came into poetry through Robert Frost, and that he is a very pastoral poet, so
Yeah.
I can relate. I got into words when I was young, probably a little bit before I got into movies. I went out and bought my very first book with my very own money. Had to order it from the bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
It was Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King, and it's a novella, so it's a little shorter than most of his books. And that was later made into a movie called Silver Bullet with Corey Haim and Gary Busey.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that book cover to cover in one sitting, and it just kind of changed the way I looked at literature. And then I started finding poetry. Nobody had told me about poetry, and I've just kind of got lost in words ever since. I don't really read as much as I used to. I do listen to audio books when I'm driving, so I kind of still keep the words in my heart. But that's interesting that was your first foray into literature, or Ray Bradbury, really.
The fact that I was reading about the woods made the woods richer,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I mean, it was already in people like, oh, you were just reading what somebody's imaginative description of what you were seeing. Yeah, but having the words in my heart made the thing that I was experiencing even richer. Like maybe the same way that, like, when you're with your spouse, you've exchanged words to one another, and maybe you have a card or something that they wrote you, and
Mm.
looking at that and those words can make the experience of being with them even deeper.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain for people who don't like reading or just like not into words at all. Just I know people who, even filmmakers, who are just like, I'm not really into language. And I'm like, man, you're missing a whole dimension of can enrich your life.
Especially when it's kind of internal and you have to like see the visuals of what you're being described as you're reading.
I'll get off Bradbury after this, I swear. But another thing Ray said was, he used to tell young people when he goes to speak to colleges, he would say, your job is to tell the world what they are. If you're a dancer, you say, here's the way I dance you. If you're an artist, here's the way I paint you. If you're an architect, here's the way I build you. You tell the world what they are, and then they look at it. And for the first time, they see through what you've created, and they say, that's what we are. We didn't realize it. And I think that's the beautiful thing about holding up your best view for the world, your best hopes for the world, to the world, and saying, this is what we are. Even if we're not that right now, and people look at it and say, that is what we are. I want that to be. And so I'm guilty of being too earnest and not cynical enough, I guess.
I don't think there's such a thing as being too earnest, because if there were more of us,
I like that, Beer. Thank you.
that would become the norm, really, wouldn't it?
It's easy, isn't it? It's so easy to be cynical.
Well, I don't know if it's easy. I think it's as easy to be cynical as it is to be optimistic and try to realize who and what we are, and collectively we have the numbers. And we don't have to keep fearing who the governments tell us to fear, the boogeyman du jour. At the end of the day, people are people across the world. And if we could just appeal to each other and then be like, look, I think everyone desires peace. This planet has had enough strife and war over the last, 500 years, if not more.
Yeah.
That now it's time for maybe us to lead ourselves and do those things that Ray Bradbury had envisioned for the human species, much like what Elon Musk is doing right now. He's sending us back to space continuously and consistently. So when we're not busy killing each other, so, like Buckminster Fuller said, there's too much money going into the war chest, and instead of putting it into weaponry, it needs to go into livenry. So we can have these wonderful visions that Bradbury saw, and other visionaries besides him.
We have to have an enemy, right? We have to have so we unite best when we have something that we're all against. And so Ray's idea was space. That can be because space will kill you in a nanosecond. It doesn't care.
Yeah.
If you're not careful, space will kill you. The universe is cold in that way. And so if we could all say we are going to conquer space, that was his dream.
Yes.
Yeah, well, he was coming of age at, the time when all of that was just science fiction. And, it started, it was, in the 50s or so when they started realizing, well, we can probably make it to space. And
it's
so
astounding when you look at it. I mean, like the phones that we have, I don't know how many times the computing power of the original, Apollo. But it's amazing when you look at like the toggle switches and things that look like they're from the original Star Trek, and like that got us to the moon.
Yeah. I just went to Alamogordo, New Mexico with my 4-year-old daughter, Aribella, I brought her down there. We went to White Sands National Park and had a blast there. But the New Mexico Space History Museum is there. And we went there and just, they had, parts of modules, and then they had like command centers and stuff. And yeah, all of that could be put on a computer chip now.
It's insane.
Yeah, technology is pretty crazy. And then,
I just want to say it's amazing too what we can create once we get past our fear factor, really, isn't it? Once we get past our own fear, our own egos, and imagine what the next 1,000 years could hold for the human species, especially if contact is allowed with our extraterrestrial family.
yeah, I think when I was in high school, it might have been junior high school, we had a project where we got to like interview our grandparents for a paper we had to write or something. And I remember talking to my grandma, and she said that she was blown away that there are such things as airplanes. That she couldn't fathom that as a child, being able to do that. And she, up into her uh, elderly state, would tell me, yeah, just being in an airplane and stuff like that, it's just super wild to her. And um, she used it to her advantage. Her and my grandpa, I grew up in the Midwest, just outside of Chicago, and they would take trips from Illinois to like LA or somewhere like that, just for a lobster dinner. And so they would eat and hang out for a few hours and then fly back, or fly back the next day. And yeah, she just like that was just so crazy for her, something that she couldn't fathom as a child. But as she got older and that, flight became a thing, that was just crazy to her. So she took advantage of it.
Well, sometimes it's really daunting to see the how technology changes so fast. My grandfather was born in 1909 and died in 93. And the changes he saw were absolutely astonishing. And of course, as a child, you look at these people as being rather ancient. And now that, I am where I'm at, it doesn't seem so ancient anymore. But over time, if you're a good observer, you witness the changes that happen to the earth and to society. And to some, they just must be so astonishing that it's difficult for them to wrap their heads around. But also that as everything changes so fast and we have access to that information, I think almost everyone's on the same page these days. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I mean, to some degree, anyways.
Yeah. And Bill, I'm interested. You would have been, I think, 4 years old when we went to the moon. Do you remember any of that?
My grandmother took us outside, and I have a vague memory of looking up at the moon and of her pointing. She said later that I was telling you that there were people walking around up there, because it was astounding to her that such a thing could happen.
Yeah.
But I remember the excitement of the Apollo age, and the sort of pride, and then it sort of dying away.
Yeah. Yeah. I that drives me crazy knowing that I was born in 1979, so that was 10 years before I was born,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems so much longer ago, but I was only 10 years removed from that. So it's kind of crazy that it's still something fairly new to, humankind leaving our hemisphere.
These are all these things that we're talking about are the type of things that I wish filmmakers would explore more. And a lot of times the reason they don't, is particularly indie filmmakers, is they're worried about what do people want to see? What do people want to see? And I'm a big believer that if you don't have, $10 million,
Hmm.
If you've only got, whatever it is, I know people who've made movies for as little as $4,000 or 40 grand. You tell people what they want to see. You create the world for them and you invite them in with confidence. And
Yeah.
there will be some number of people who come with you, but you can't be afraid by saying, well, people won't like what I like. But no, any artist, you've got to do what you do, the world the way you see it. And there'll be a little niche of people who will dig it and they'll be with you. And, maybe they'll grow. That's the way I've built my career. I've done weird things, but things that were interesting to me at various points of my life and my career. And, I've never been big, but I have little followings for the various things that I've done.
Yeah. And for me as a filmmaker, uh, I I do exactly that. I want to make movies that I want to see. I don't need to be commercially successful, but I want to make something that's entertaining.
Mm.
And uh, I sent you a screener to my film. It came out of the sky, and that was an alien UFO movie that I have been wanting to make since I was 8 years old. I finally wrote what I wanted to see. It took me a long time to get there, but it was something that I wanted to see, something that interests me, and I wanted something that I could build on as well. So I've written two sequels to it, one of which I'm in talks to having you play one of the characters. I also, when I'm writing, not only write what I want to see, I also write for actors I want to see in my movie. And I wrote this part specifically with you in mind because I thought it would be super fun for you. And I'm hoping that we get to iron out all the details. I'm talking to your manager, Matt, tomorrow, actually.
Me too. And you remind me of something one of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, wrote. He said, "Pay attention to your life. Pay attention particularly to the things that arrest you and the things that make your breath short and the things that make you cry, because
Mhm.
that is the universe or God telling you something. Pay attention to those things." And that's what you did. A thing that had been in your mind and wouldn't let you go since you were 8 years old. You did it.
Yeah.
It's the essence of art.
Yeah. So we were just talking about kind of budgets and movies and indie filmmakers. Um, I revisited Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies yesterday.
Oh my God.
I I bought that on Blu-ray right when it came out, so I've watched it probably a dozen times because it's so fun. Um, but one thing that myself and my director of photography, Steven, talked about the other day was that movie was made for 150 grand, and it had a lot of production value. As far as the killings and stuff like that were super fun. But what I enjoy about that movie is it's very campy, but you take the role as Abraham Lincoln to heart, and you don't cheap out in any way. You are super convincing. Um, I don't know if you've watched the Apple TV show Manhunt or not yet, but Hamish Linkletter plays Abraham Lincoln, and he very much reminded me of your performance in that movie. I
Thank you.
actually think you would have been even better in that role than he
Thank
was.
you. And that was the director. My first instincts are hardly ever right. And that's one of two cases where the director really, at the beginning, the director is Richard Shinkman. And I said, what are you looking for? Thinking that he wanted sort of a campy. And he said, I want the Lincoln on the penny.
Oh wow!
I said, all right, Lincoln on the penny. Okay. Okay. Um, and when I did Circus of the Dead with Billy Pond, I played Papa Corn, who's is reprehensible. clown, but my instinct was to be sort of clownish with the role. And Billy immediately took me aside and he said, no, he's a necrophiliac, homicidal, murderous rapist whose day job happens to be as a circus clown, but it could just as easily be as a plumber. You don't
That's very
play
interesting
don't
direct.
play the day job, play what's underneath the grease paint. It's a good idea to listen to directors. I always caution young actors, have your ideas, but be quiet until you've really listened to the director.
Yeah. And for you, you enjoy playing historical figures or real people.
Yes, I
Um,
do.
Many years ago, when I first moved to Albuquerque, I started developing a script. I don't know if you remember this or not, but you were in on it. I was going to have you play Nikola Tesla
Mm.
and
I had forgotten about that.
relationships with inhabitants of celestial bodies is what
Yes.
I
Yeah.
called it. And basically, what I wanted to do for that script was put Tesla, Einstein, and Oppenheimer in a room together.
Yes.
And there is a document out there called just that, relationships with inhabitants of celestial bodies, that supposedly Einstein and Oppenheimer wrote together. It's actually very, very interesting read. And what it is it's kind of a blueprint on what the government and what people should do if and when we are visited by extraterrestrials. Um, so you can find it, just Google that and it'll come up. And that's kind of the basis of where I kind of got the idea um, to make that movie. It fizzled out. We never made it, but I had nobody else in mind but you to play Nikola Tesla.
Thank
And
you.
in talking about that project, you and I talked about how you enjoy playing historical characters. What draws you to that?
That each of us is a historical character, or will be, if there are people left to remember us. And we think that they're so different from us, but they're not. Lincoln was in a hellish marriage.
Yeah,
His best friend, who was a lawyer, tried to encourage him to get a divorce. And Lincoln said, no. He said, I believe that every man has it in his power to be miserable or happy in his union. I choose to be happy. And that also informed how he responded when the South wanted to pull away. He said, no, this is a union, and you will learn to either be miserable or happy in it. But but it's that universality. What I love about a historical figure, like I played General Sherman for the History Channel, is finding something in them that we could say, oh my God, that's just like me, or that's just like Dad, or, that's just like my cousin. They're not any different than us. Even the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, they were in the same kind of bodies that we had. If you stripped them all naked, they look the same. We all want the same things, variations of power and love and security. And that's why I like playing historical characters, because I like sort of ripping them out of the historical frame and saying, yeah, they lived in a time that was really, really different than ours, but they were not really, really different than us.
Hey, Bill, what's the most interesting thing or most profound thing you've learned? And by playing which historical character did you discover that through?
Jesus of Nazareth, and it was on stage only. It was never filmed. But for 12 years, I did it. I toured to colleges. I toured to houses of worship of every denomination, mosque and temples and churches and seminaries. At that time, there was this sort of movement called the Historical Jesus Movement, and it was like this effort to get back to whatever Jesus was originally. And I was really, really into that at that time in my life. And so I thought, okay, what if you could just hear just the words he said and nothing else, just as his original hearers heard them? What would it be like? So that's what I did. So I did the makeup and the costume of what a first century rabbi in that occupied country would have looked like. because his country was under Roman domination at the time. And so I just did his words, and we had some questions that had actually been asked of him spread out throughout the audience, and people could ask him. So I did over 1,000 performances of it live,
Wow.
and I had the most astounding experiences, but none of the experiences were with me. People were looking past me, having their own experience with the figure of Jesus and whatever he meant to them.
Mm.
I had a bit where I would take off, one of the sayings is, if anyone takes your coat, give him your cloak as well. And so, which is like, it was a joke because you'd have nothing on then. That's it. It was Jesus using hyperbole. But to illustrate it, I had like this sort of a shawl around my neck, and I would take it off and just randomly put it on somebody in the congregation. And so I did it once in a church, and this older man, now about my age, looked at me and just started to like shake. I mean, literally shake. And he handed it back to me rather violently. And he said, I can't take this. I've done things. I can't take this. And I was like, wow.
Well, yeah.
He's not even talking to me. And so it was and I would wash people's feet. And as I washed people's feet, I would bring up just one representative person for the foot washing bit in the dialogues. And it blew me away to look up into people's eyes and see them have an experience with something that had nothing to do with me. I was just sort of like prompting it or suggesting it.
And must have been very cathartic too, because it sounds as though you were channeling the Christ consciousness and whatever it meant to these people. You were helping them connect with it, via a cosmic bridge, as it were. Did you feel transformed after that? And if so, how?
Yeah, I never would do it today, ever.
Mm-hmm.
I was really arrogant at that time in my life, and I wasn't living right.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't being a faithful partner. In many ways, I was a really deficient human being. But still, even though all that was true, somehow these performances were able to suggest to people something of the divine. And it led me actually to believe that, yes, there really is a divine. You can talk about what it is, the great presence, God, but there's something that's larger than us, a reality beyond realities and a power beyond powers. And that wasn't my intention in doing the piece. The intention was to say, look, Jesus was just like you and me. And he said these things. But the complete opposite happened because I was such a crappy person. But that didn't matter. Still, by just suggesting and providing these little touchstones for this divine presence, people were able to get past all of my crappiness and get into it. So it did. Yeah, it changed me.
Would that have been the catalyst for you to begin thinking about why is it I'm a crappy person, or what kind of work do I do, or did it inspire you to do your shadow work at that
It
point?
inspired me to. It inspired me to think about it, but it took another decade for my crappy behavior to hit bottom. Like all addicts, and realize that my life has to change or I'm going to die.
What advice could you give people out there who may be struggling with addiction now? What is there one single piece of advice that could help them break free of that and regain their independence and sovereignty?
Yes, it doesn't matter. I don't mean that the addiction doesn't matter. I mean that it doesn't matter how many times you fall down, how many times you fail. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how bad you think you are or how hopeless you think you are. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that today, just today, you try. Don't even think about tomorrow. Just today, you try. And tomorrow is something completely and totally different. That for me, that was and still is very helpful.
It's kind of like taking one step at a time.
Yeah, I'm not any better than anybody else, but I'm not any worse than anybody else either. but I'm not any better, but I'm not any worse. It's got to be a constant refrain in your mind. There's nothing wrong with you. Um, you're not worse than anybody in the world. Other people have variations of this same thing. It's just that you have this thing.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up, but also don't excuse behavior because oh well, I'm deficient and I can't do any better. That's a lie. You can do better. You just have to choose it and choose it every day and know that some days you won't do better. But that's only one day.
Absolutely. And Bear, this is the second time you've mentioned shadow work. You mentioned it in our first episode, and Josephine was interested in what that was, so she kind of looked it up to see, and she asked me to ask you to elaborate on what shadow work is, because it is built into psychology.
Jung.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Well, I'm certainly no expert on it, but for me, it's doing everything, taking everything away, or examining and analyzing, well, myself, since it's the only person I'm an expert on, thankfully. Whatever it was that prevented me from being a fully loving human being, or dealing with past traumas in life from the family, or whatever it was, I think that prevents you from progressing in life and getting to where you really want to be, right, Bill? I mean, it's kind of just a collection of built up fear, and we all have to sort of process that somehow. So shadow work might be the darkest sides of ourselves that aren't appealing if we have addictions, or if we're just rude people, or if we're defensive, that sort of thing, self-sabotage, in some cases. So it's moving beyond all that and figuring out why that occurs. So you're just a more loving and fully embracing human being at the end of the day.
A friend of mine, Mark Savage, who's a great director I've worked with 3 times, said that by examining the darkness and the shadows in us, that they become less frightening and less mysterious, and we're better able to put them in their place. Don't give the shadows the power of saying, "Oh, I will never examine you, and I will never." If you have a dark thought, think that thought through completely. Think it through and take it to its logical conclusion, and then think, is this what I really want? God, that's so helpful to me, because it's so easy to have these dark fantasies, but then you work them through completely, let them have their play. Is this what you really want? No, it's not. And then I can even laugh a little, and the shadow loses its power.
That's right. Well, for me specifically, I mean, when I was doing my shadow work, it could be something as, I became defensive as a teenager, and I kind of carried that into my other aspects of life and adult life. And I wasn't getting really good results from being a defensive individual. So there was one point I'm like, why am I reacting this way, Well, I had to deal with a number of reasons, but I was determined to overcome it. So if I was in a situation that may trigger my defensiveness, I'm not going to react. And I'm certainly not going to be uptight about it. I'm going to go, is this really necessary for me to react at all? Or how should I react? Well, always choose to react in a loving way if possible. And it's always possible to choose your reactions. And hopefully it's in a loving way, because everything we as humans want, in my opinion, is on the other side of fear, no matter what it is. And we pick up all these fragments of fear from, childhood on. And I realize we're at 48, 46 right now. But, and anyways, people can choose to change their behavior at any given time once they become aware of it, and react from a more loving, heart-centered space. I think that's ultimately what I'm saying. Yeah.
And realize that other people are afraid too. They're just as afraid as you.
Oh, heck yeah. Absolutely.
That's, that's very, very, very liberating, because then really there are no enemies. There are people who may do things you find reprehensible. And if somebody comes to me with a hammer, I'm going to hit them with
for sure.
a hammer if I have one. But I am not required to say this person is evil. All that is necessary is to say, this person who is fearful like myself has chosen to come at me with a hammer. Therefore, I will hit them with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that, I elevate their fear into something cosmic. Everybody is the same, and we're all struggling with variations of the same stuff.
Right. And we're all individualizations of source, having individualized experiences. So we're kind of just getting to know ourselves.
But we only know what we know, right?
Yeah, man, we need to go out and know more about it through experience,
Yeah. Because, like, people don't know what they don't know. I know that sounds ridiculously childish, but we only know what we've experienced in our life. And if
Yeah.
we're so absolutely sure that everything we think is correct, we're fools.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's something that I learned in philosophy. Socrates went to the Oracle of Delphi and asked who the smartest person was, and they said, "You." And he said, "Me? I don't know anything." And the Oracle said, "Exactly."
Wow.
Beautifully said.
So what I want to know is, how the hell are you guys going to promote this interview saying we talked about what? How do you summarize this?
That's a good question. But before we go, I'd like to leave the two of you with this thought. I've had many close encounters of the third kind, and on one instance, in this one situation, I remember thinking to the ETs, "Who made you, and where do you come from?" They said, "There is a God, and Source had made all of us, everything," which is really profound and mind blowing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to get that in, Justin, just in case if we didn't do our UFO paranormal show.
We'll be doing that shortly, but yeah. See, and for me, I'm not religious at all, but I am very cosmic.
You certainly
I believe in something much, much bigger than myself, but something that I don't think, in my opinion, nobody knows anything about. Some people attribute that to God and Jesus and all of that. And in navigating my daughters, they're 4 and 8, through religion, they are always asking me about my beliefs because my oldest, who is 8, Helena, goes to Catholic school. And, part of their curriculum is religion. And, they even have on every Wednesday, they go to church and they speak in church from time to time, or do a reading or something like that. And, while it's not something I believe, I absolutely see the advantage it can have on somebody to believe. And if you go back far enough, there's um, writing and stuff, and mythology, I believe, was kind of created to answer some of those questions.
Yeah.
And also, um, we're trying to kind of give people a path in which, they can live their lives, in sort of rules, thou shalt not kill and all of that stuff. And I think that's how it kind of came about to me. That's how religion kind of came about, to make people behave. But people have their own experiences, and I definitely don't dismiss any of those.
Well, the Star People actually gave us what has become organized religion, the basic tenets, anyways, of how the human species at the time should conduct itself to live basically in some sort of harmonious fashion on this planet eons ago.
Yeah, and and I'm trying to teach my kids to be open-minded as well. And when you're in kind of thick of Catholic doctrine and stuff, it's kind of hard to keep an open mind of all of that. But I will say that growing up, my parents weren't super religious. At a young age, they didn't make us go to church. And that allowed me to discover other religions and way of life out there. I found Buddhism, and my late teen years and early 20s. And I followed that, and I still follow a lot of that. And while Buddhism is considered for some reason a religion, it is the opposite of religion. It's basically a pathway of living, mainly compassionate life.
Well, Justin, your children are absolutely lucky to have you in their life. You're one of the most beautiful people. You're one of the most loving fathers and human beings I've ever met. And you really do encompass like Buddha nature. Just keep being your loving self, man. You're doing a great job at it.
I appreciate that. Tell that to them.
Okay, bring them on sometime. They'll be happy to.
They will. I'll bring them on as guests someday when I'm
Great.
recording this at home. Bill, I did have one question that I kind of filed in my filing cabinet of my brain while we were talking about non-entertainment stuff. I want to know who you would like to play as a historical figure. Who's somebody that you think you would not only knock out of the park, but also someone who like interests you? Is there any historical figure or even just somebody from literature?
Yeah, there's a literary figure. That's an easy answer. Eric from The Phantom of the Opera, the original, the book.
Oh, wow.
The book is not. It's not a great book. It's not even a good book. But there are moments. There are moments, and some of those moments describe how Eric became what he became. He was born the way that he was born. Nobody threw acid in his face. He didn't have some horrible accident. He wasn't a pretty guy with the little scars on his face. He was a monster, and he was born that way. And outwardly, he was a monster. He became a monster inwardly because people could not deal with, beginning with his parents, they couldn't deal with the way that he looked. And so they sold him to a traveling carnival, and that's where he began his odyssey that led him to become Eric. But the fact that he was born that way, only in the Chaney 1925 silent film is that alluded to. And it's not more strongly alluded to because they tested the original Phantom of the Opera, which Chaney wanted him to be more sympathetic, and it didn't test well. So they destroyed that and shot a new ending. None of the other adaptations have done it. So I keep telling, every young director I meet, it's public domain. It doesn't even have to be set in an opera. You just have to capture this character and why he became what he became. Yeah, it's haunted me ever since I saw the Chaney version when I was a kid, projected on a bed sheet in a church basement. That that informed my gold standard, which is the wounded monster. Now, I've only gotten to do it a couple of times in pure form. One was on Criminal Minds because the guy who wrote it and the makeup artist was a Chaney fan. But that idea of the wounded monster, it haunts me. So yeah, if there was one, it would be that one.
That's really beautiful, Bill.
Yeah. And what about that do you see inside yourself?
The wounds, the monstrousness from an early age. I had really bad acne. I have, it sounds weird, but I have a weird looking torso. Like I have like my rib cage really is really prominent, and then it drops down to almost nothing afterwards, and it's kind of skeletal. So I get made fun of for my face and for my body, and because I wasn't like the other boys, I wasn't interested in football, and so I clearly identified early on with the monsters when I discovered the world of monsters. And I love them, and my sympathy was always with the monster. But also the knowledge that one reason they're a monster is because you wouldn't let them be anything else.
Right. And it's kind of like the Elephant Man.
That's right.
In the David Lynch movie, kind of shows that.
It's just human nature, and it's why I play the characters I play, because I have the face that I have. And people want to see a face like mine, and they want their suspicions confirmed, because when they look at me, they say, that son of a bitch is dangerous. And then if I do turn out to be dangerous in the role, it's very satisfying to audiences because they think, I knew it. I knew that guy was messed up. And that's why guys who look like me play the roles we do.
Justifies their fears, doesn't it?
Yeah, people love to have their preconceptions justified. It's one of the favorite things. And you have to be careful when you're making movies, because if you ask people too many times for their suspicions to be wrong, they get pissed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also goes to prove that very few things are actually as they appear, you know?
Ain't that the truth?
Like the cartoon of, like, I'm sure you've seen the comparison. There's a little girl in this meme. She's hiding a butcher knife behind her back, and there's a Frankenstein character who's hiding like a bouquet of flowers or something, right?
That's right. I just finished a film. I've done like 3 in the last 6 months. And the last one I did, I was at a table at breakfast and so a new cast member came in who had just come in. It was one of those we had people rotating in and out. And I was in my makeup, and I had this horrendous scar going down one side of my face, and they had my cheeks hollowed out. I looked pretty gnarly. And I'm munching my toast or whatever, and the guy comes up and he speaks to everybody at the table and says, "Hey, I'm Joe. I just come on, came in from Atlanta, blah, blah, blah." But he doesn't speak to me. He looks at me, but his eyes shift, and he goes back to talking to somebody else, and he walks away.
Oh, wow.
And the makeup artist was at the table, and I said, "Good job, dude. Good job." Because the guy didn't even realize it, but he ignored this human being because something about that didn't look right.
Well, isn't it wonderful that every day that we have on this planet is another opportunity to work through our fears and misconceptions, and hopefully, increase the light for everyone else, and just increase the joy we find in life by overcoming our fears.
It is wonderful.
Yeah. Fear is an unbelievable motivator.
Madison Avenue knows all about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, Bill, we're pretty much out of time. I want to thank you for coming on the show. As always, it's great to talk with you. We'll catch up on the phone here soon as well. We're definitely going to have you back on, because we didn't even scratch the surface of what I envisioned we would have even talked about. But we got into some other realms, and that's great, because Bear and I decided early on that we weren't going to have a genre-specific podcast, so we're going to talk about a little bit of everything. And, and it seems like art has run through our veins for quite a long time, and that is definitely something that we can probably elaborate more on. So we will have you back on, especially if you have anything to promote. We would definitely bring you on for that. Is there anything you'd like to promote at the moment that you're
I
doing?
hate promotion. I have to do it, but I always feel like people are going to say, "Asshole, talking about yourself again." I'm like, dude, it's my job. I have to. No, not right now. People can follow me on Twitter if they'd like. I respond to DMs, and I'm not really great on Instagram. I have it. But yeah, and I'm on Facebook too, and I'm always available by email. My website is billoberst.com.
Great. Thanks again for coming on. You've been listening to the Barely Audible podcast with Justin Romine and Bear.
It's been good to talk to you, Bill, and we appreciate your time today. And come back. We'll do a full hour sometime, or come back as often as you want, and we'll take it any place you'd like. And Justin and I are always up for an adventure, aren't we?
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Good luck
again, Bill. And
good luck with the pod.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll definitely be in touch to have you play Gerald, and part 2 of It Came Out of the Sky. So
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay.